In this video, we will discuss arcs of a circle. First, let's review some key terminology. The central angle of a circle is an angle formed by two radii with the vertex at the center. So in the example here, the central angle is this angle shown with the measure of 95. So the central angle is angle APB. Now, a central angle creates two intercepted arcs. An intercepted arc is the part of the circle that lies between two segments, rays, or lines that intersect the circle. And a central angle and its intercepted minor arc have equal measures. So, for example, we said before that we had the central angle, as shown here, as the 95 degrees. So the central angle, we said, was angle APB. Now the intercepted arc, and we're just going to talk about the minor arc for right now, would be this part of the circle that's formed by that angle. So we would say that the intercepted arc is, we use the two endpoints, so it's AB, and we put a little arc above it to indicate that it's just referring to that outside of the circle. Now we have a couple of different types of intercepted arcs that we can deal with. The first type is a minor arc, and a minor arc is an arc that's less than a semicircle. And the notation we use is we use the endpoint with an endpoint, and we put a little arc above it. So for example, if we're talking about the minor arc as shown here, just indicating the part that I drew over, I would list this as arc BC or arc CB. Because like for a line segment, doesn't matter the order, but just that we're using the two endpoints. A major arc is an arc that's greater than a semicircle or greater than half of a circle. So if I were looking at the diagram, the major arc is the part in red that I'm tracing over. And the notation we use is we have an endpoint, a point on the arc, and endpoint with an arc above it. So for example, we could call this arc BDC or arc CDB. But notice that those two endpoints of B and C are included at the edges, and that point D, which is shown on the diagram as marked here, is given to us in the middle. The last type that we have is what is called a semicircle, which is half of a circle. And the notation we use is we use an endpoint, a point on the arc, and an endpoint with the little arc above it. So for example, if I wanted to name this semicircle, you could call it arc EHG or arc GHE. The reason it's important that we use H is so we know that we are referring to this part of the circle, because if I just called it EG, we wouldn't know whether I was calling it the green side or the black side of the circle. So in summary, the key thing is that we're using our endpoints, knowing how many letters we use to name each. So for a minor arc, you use 2 letters. And then for all other cases, major uses 3 letters to name, and semicircle uses 3 letters to name their arcs. Now, if we wanted to name 2 examples, we can choose any of the following. So if I wanted to name 2 minor arcs, one example of a minor arc was we could call this arc right here is a minor arc. So I can call this arc BD. It'll be one way of naming it, or you could call it arc DB. Another example of a minor arc I could choose could potentially be this arc over here, which we could refer to as FE or EF. Now, if I want to choose 2 major arcs, if I erase the highlighting to start over, a major arc is greater than a semicircle. So it's greater than a semicircle. So one example could be that I could start at my point F, go all the way around the semicircle to B, and keep going to D. And if I want to name this, we could name this a couple of different ways. We could call this arc FAD. You could call it arc FBD. You could call it arc DBF. Or you could call it arc DAF. However, you only need one of those names. If I wanted to name an arc that started at A, went through B, D, E, and over to F, there's a lot of names we could use for this. We could call it arc ABF. You could call it arc ADF. You could call it arc AEF. And we could continue reversing the names. Again, we only need one example of each of these names, but this is all of our possibilities. Now, if we wanted to name a semicircle, there's a couple of options we could choose. Now, if I want to specifically name this semicircle, so if I want to name this specific semicircle, I would have to call it arc EFA or arc AFE. Now, let's say I want to name the semicircle on the other side of that figure. So I want to name this semicircle, highlighted in gray. You could call this arc ABE, arc ADE. You could call it arc EDA, or you could call it arc EBA. But notice by including that third letter, it changes which arc we're referring to. Now, this next question has a lot of information to it. Let's first start by just identifying what type of arc each arc is. So for our first example, it asks for arc CD. So if I look at arc CD, it's less than a semicircle. So this would be an example of a minor arc. Next, for arc CGD, I'm going to start at C, go around the circle through G, and then over to stop at D. Now, since this is greater than a semicircle, this is an example of a major arc. The next example asks for you to classify arc AG. So you'd start at A and go over to G. Since this is less than a semicircle, this would be an example of a minor arc. Next, for arc AC, I start at A and go over to C. And since this is less than a semicircle, this is an example of a minor arc. For the next examples, ask you to start at G, go around to C, and then back around to F. And we can see, looking at what's highlighted, this is greater than a semicircle. So this is an example of a major arc. For the next example, for ACF, it asks us to start at A. So if I find my point at A, go around to C, and then keep going to F, this is greater than a semicircle. So it's an example of a major arc. For the next one, and the last question, it asks for the measure of arc ACD. So they would start at A, go over to C, and end at D. And we can see from looking at that that's exactly half of a circle. So this would be what we would refer to as a semicircle.